Brewster here, new episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Colosseum II, and I wanted to put this episode together hot on the heels of the Gary Moore 3-for-all that I just made, before this lesson. And that lesson featured, Gary Moore licks while he was playing with Colosseum II in 1978. And Colosseum II, the band, formed in England in 1975, and was definitely kind of spearheaded by drummer John Heisman. John, worked with John Mayall, also the Graham Bond organization, and he was the drummer in the original Colosseum band, Colosseum I. I think Colosseum I broke up like around 1971, and then Colosseum II eventually was formed after that. Definitely kind of a progressive jazz rock fusion band, very interesting music. They only released 3 albums, but definitely a dynamite group. And Gary Moore on guitar, which is hellfire on a 6-string for sure. So buckle up, here we go. So here's an image featuring the members of Colosseum II, and that includes both bassists. Originally, Neil Murray was the bassist. You might remember Neil, working with Whitesnake and some different groups. But this is the band members and some of the bands they either played with before or after Colosseum II, right here. And of course, on guitar is Gary Moore, and I featured this, in the 3-for-all that was the lesson before this episode. And Gary Moore is featured on all 3 of Colosseum II's albums, and it's really interesting, like I mentioned in the 3-for-all lesson, it's really interesting to hear Gary push himself in this progressive kind of jazz rock fusion direction, which was extremely popular, like in the mid to late 70s. And that's what Colosseum II was doing, this kind of prog fusion thing. Sometimes it's funky, sometimes it's very progressive, and then sometimes it's just this kind of rock out, kind of blues rock. But anyway, definitely the legendary Gary Moore, and that's really the highlight of the feature of this lesson, is Gary. So the chord-based and rhythm guitar parts in this lesson came from 3 Colosseum II albums, and that's all they released were 3 albums. And we're going to hit quite a bit from Strange and New Flesh, their first album, and then a little bit from the other 2 releases. All 3 of these are packed with dynamite, guitar parts and solos from Gary Moore. The music's very interesting. Even if you don't really like the song, be sure to stick around and listen to the guitar solo and some of Gary's parts, because even if the song isn't really that strong, Gary's guitar parts always delivered. But anyway, here's the image with the album covers where I pulled music for this lesson. With the opening, that was Night Creeper. That's a bonus track from Strange New Flesh, and I have the vinyl, copy of that album, but Night Creeper doesn't appear on the original release, which sucks. But this song doesn't suck. It's actually really cool. Something like this. So it starts with a single note riff. That C sharp D to E, that G to E right there. And then you're doing this low E to G and then G sharp to A right there. And loop that 3 times. Walking up, something like that. Kind of quasi-chromatic, and kind of spelling out like partial arpeggios and stuff. And then you hear this E minor to a 7th fret bar to that E minor. Do some chord hits right there, and then you're hearing this big E5, an E5 there with the low E, the open B, and the open high E like that. And then go down to a D like that with the open B and open high E. And then A minor right there. And then G major like that. And there you know, Gary's kind of playing with that chromatic move again. And then right there, do a D5 or a E5 to a D5, and then F sharp minor right there. Got this single note riff, and that little single note riff kind of moves into a C sharp minor right there. So that C sharp minor, you know, with that single note riff into that C, or that F sharp minor with the single note riff into C sharp minor. Sorry, like that. And then that last time after you do that single note riff, you know, from F sharp minor into that C sharp minor, you're going to end with a B sus4 to B major, and it just kind of rings. And of course it moves into the next part of the song. But that's a real busy, active, really cool moment, and I don't know why it wasn't included on the original album, because that song kicks ass for sure. Next up's this obnoxious riff from Dark Side of the Moog from Strange New Flesh, like this. You know, something like that. Not really hard to play, kind of short and sweet. The low E, and then you're playing that E major kind of triad right there. And then you're going to move up and you're grabbing part of that 12th fret bar, and that's an implied E minor 7. So you're going from E major to E minor 7. And then, and that's like a, well, that'd be like an implied, what, E6 flat 9, I guess? Like that. Really unusual tonalities there. You know, major to minor 7, major to that 6 flat 9 chord. That's really unusual, but really cool. And that erratic, kind of angry sound that you're going to hear from some of these Colosseum II albums and songs. Here's another riff from Dark Side of the Moog, and this takes place around 311 in the song, and it's based around A Phrygian. It's really cool, like this. Definitely has that Phrygian kind of, you know, flat 9 flavor, flat 2. You can hear it, and it's starting with this G, A, B flat, A. And you want to do that again. And then you hear this little booger. And right there, that's like an implied E7 sus4 to a D7 sus4, like that. You're just barring the 7th fret on the A, D, and G and picking through it. And then the same thing in D, implied D7 sus4. And then that B flat to C back to that A. Very proggy. It kind of reminds me of Tool for some reason, but that's a cool little riff. I love that little, like the tonality and like the flavor there. Yeah, that's a cool riff. Next up's the riff from the song Gemini and Leo from Strange New Flesh. It's real funky, like this. Something like that. So super funky. It's based around the Hendrix chord, that C sharp 7 sharp 9 right there. So it's like there's a chord hit and then all that funky single note business there, like that, like the root note and then the chord. And there's like little percussive, you know, muted strums in there too. And then you're doing that B, C sharp, E, C sharp. And then that F sharp to E. And then you're climbing up chromatically there, that F sharp, G, G sharp to that B. And then you kind of start it again, the single note, then the Hendrix chord. And then that B, C sharp, E, C sharp again. And then that F sharp to E. And then slide that B into C sharp right there. that whole riff again. It's a cool riff. Next up's the song The Awakening. This is yet another bonus track from Strange New Flesh, and once again I have no idea why they didn't include this song on that album, because this is really cool, and there's a cool chord hit too, like this. Something like that. So we're doing this E power chord to a D sharp power chord back to an E power chord, and then we're doing this. So look at that, and that's basically like an E sus2 add sharp 11 right there. There's your sus2, that F sharp, and there's your sharp 11, that A sharp. So you're doing, that's really cool. And then you do that chord slide again, and then there's like a little scale run there. It's almost like C Lydian. You know, that C, D, E, F sharp, G, A. And then do that first riff again. And then there's this riff, it just kind of keeps repeating and looping. Cool song and real proggy too. Next up's the Scorch. This is from the album Electric Savage, and actually Gary's doing arpeggios that outline a chord progression. So this is chordplay, and you know, arpeggios are the notes of a chord played separately, so it's all related to chords here. But the underlying, you know, progression that Gary's playing over, it's basically the keyboard and the bass, and it's an E, like an E5 to a B5. And then you hear it going from G to D, G to D. Right? So E, let it ring, and then B, let that ring, and then that G to D. And then Gary's doing this. So right there, we're basically playing, you know, E major right there, that B, G sharp to that E, and kind of rolling it right there. And then lining up right with the chords, and then it's B major right there, that F sharp, D sharp to B. And then with that G and D, there's G right there, that D, B, and G. And then right there, there's D major, that A, F sharp, and D. And then back to the G, and back to the D right there. So you put those guitars together and you've got the Scorch. You know, something like that. I think I was rushing the loop right there, but that's the Scorch, basically. Chords, and then the arpeggios kind of outlining the chords. Okay, last but not least is Last Exit from the album War Dance, and it's this twisting, turning series of chords, and then eventually Gary starts soloing over the top of it. I just grabbed it because I like this kind of twisted chord mutation as it unfolds, and it's just ringing chords that are constantly changing, like this. So that's basically like a big E5, right? Like that. Then move that down a whole step and keep that open B and open high E in there. Then move that down a whole step. That's like a C major 7 right there with the open B and open high E. And then you're going to move down another fret right there. That's like a B minor 11 implied because the high E is open with that B minor chord. So right there, that B minor 11, then it's an A sus4 like that, an open position right there. And this is really cool because now it's moving to that. And that's like a G6, G6-9, add what, sharp 11 right there? And then that G is going to move down to an F sharp, and that's like an F sharp minor 7. So I love that little change right here, that A sus4 to the G6-9, add sharp 11 to the F sharp minor 7. And then you're going to end that with that C major 7 again right there. So like I said, it's just this series of mutant kind of twisting and changing chords, and then of course Gary, you know, starts soloing on top of that, and it's amazing. But something like that. So that's a really interesting, you know, song, and I'm a sucker for those kind of twisted chords and triads. That's really cool. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with this look at the Chords of Colosseum II, and definitely I'm a huge Gary Moore fan, and this era of Gary's career is really interesting. You can hear him pushing himself in a new direction, and, you know, fresh licks and fresh ideas, fresh chord approaches and riffs and stuff. Very different than the other, you know, areas of Gary's career. And, Colosseum II just never really found an audience. They definitely had a cult following, you know, and a fan base, but they didn't erupt and blow up like Return to Forever or Mahavishnu Orchestra or somebody like that. And I think that's who they were kind of channeling, you know, or at least the inspiration for this project was the proggy, you know, jazz fusion in the mid to late 70s. And very interesting, you know, kind of a footnote in Gary's career. A lot of people don't even remember Colosseum II. I do, but really cool to hear him kind of move in a totally different direction, and obviously he was very inspired in this, you know, the period too. You can hear it where it's like, man, he's on fire right here. Very cool stuff. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Ant Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.